We'll write back. Chris Loder.
Yeah.
Morning, chaps. Nice to see you.
Morning.
I wanted to concentrate my questions on the TOC side of things, because we've talked plenty about Network Rail, and I think we should just think about the TOCs a bit more. I'd like to ask both of you, Mick, I'll come to you first. The terms and conditions which we've mentioned earlier, which are the specific terms and conditions that gives you cause for concern that either the train operators want to negotiate out or you want to stand particularly firm on?
One of the things that we seem to be seeing is indication that they want to introduce DOO across the board.
Introduce DOO across the board?
Driver-only operation.
You have supported that on many occasions, haven't you, as a union?
We've got 50% of the TOCs at DOO. As you know from, I think the last time that we might have been in front of you was the Southern dispute. We do not believe it's a safe way of operation currently. Prior to the pandemic, the rate of sexual assaults in our railway had gone up dramatically, I think been recognised by this body in the past, and county lines and all the other things that were going on. So, we're very much against that.
So can I just be clear, is ASLEF's position then that driver-only operated operation is not safe? Is that ASLEF?
Always has been, yes, for the last few years.
Okay, all right. And any other terms and conditions?
Well, I'm answering loads of questions about modernisation. Last time I was asked this question by Philip Hammond, how far it goes back, about train drivers demanding time to change ends.
I'm not really worried about what Philip Hammond had to say.
I know, but it's on the list of all the things. Reduction in training time for train drivers.
Reduction in training time?
Yeah. And also forcing people to work over and above their contract at weekends. Sorry?
What is the training time at the moment?
It's roughly a year, but it depends upon which company you're in because of the geographical nature. Yeah. It takes about 34 weeks to actually train a train driver and then to get competent on various tractions and routes. It depends on what company you're in.
And what about Sundays?
Well, Sundays, we want Sundays in a working week, but we're not doing it for nothing.
Okay. So what are you saying you want for Sundays to be in the working week?
It'll be down to our membership and what's offered, but it is a difficulty for us that everything that we do when we change our members' terms and conditions goes to them for their decision, and if the deal isn't equitable, they won't vote for it.
Okay, thank you. Eddie, can I ask you the same questions then about T&Cs?
So in the train operating companies, we're concerned about new contracts being brought into the industry on far inferior terms to what currently exists. We're worried about new contracts.
I'm thinking more about the current ones, because I appreciate there's another debate. But
there's three key areas, I suppose. Number one is the reintroduction of DOO. Something that's been a subject of disputes for many years in the railway industry. They want that across the board, which we don't. They want to shut almost 1,000 ticket offices in the country.
Can I ask you about that? So I've got your press release here that you sent to the national media dated the 9th of May, and you have listed, I think, in excess of probably 1,000 ticket offices. I'm afraid I haven't been through to count them all. Can you tell me where you got that information from?
From Transport Focus.
And did they just... How are they involved?
I'd have to write to you on that because that was done in our policy department. But the people on the industry have told us it's 980 is the number now.
You've made the point about ticket office closures. Yep. But really, you haven't really been able to substantiate from within your negotiations that is actually true and accurate. I mean, suggesting, for example...
I haven't finished speaking.
Well, please do. Where has it come from?
If you give me a second, I'll substantiate for you. So the industry have told us, the people we negotiate have told us they want to close 980 ticket offices.
And they particularly want to close Clapham Junction ticket office and London Waterloo, and because there's a list. The reason I'm asking the question,
I know.
I've got a list of them here.
So that was a list.
I'm just unclear as to how...
My understanding is that was a list from Transport Focus, who were expecting a flurry of applications for the closure of those ticket offices.
So the RMT has basically made that statement
based on the information we had at the time.
Based on something from Transport Focus, not from something from the train.
No, the point has been clarified since by industry. They've told us it's 980 ticket offices that they want to close. So that's one area.
Okay.
We're concerned about across the board degradation of terms and conditions in terms of introducing new contracts of employment with longer working hours, lower pay for everyone in the industry. And we're also concerned about the Sundays question. So we've got quite a mixed picture on Sunday working. We've got people who work committed Sundays. I think you probably would have had the same terms when you were on the railway. So you've got Sundays that are voluntaries, but you're obligated to work them, so you might as well have them.
Some days we're inside the working week, as it happens.
Well, so have many of our members, and we're quite relaxed about that point. What we're not prepared to do is have our working weeks extended from the hours that we've got by 5 hours to accommodate that, without an increase in pay.
So you would like Sundays in the working week, subject to negotiation?
Don't mind. We don't mind. I've recently done a deal with Network Rail, funny enough, where we said to them you can have Sundays inside the working week, outside the working week, committed, not committed, any way you want it, as long as the pay's right for them. And they were quite content to have them outside of the working week. So I think this is a bit of one of those points that there's a lot of heat around, but doesn't make sense when you drill into it. We're quite content to accommodate Sunday working. We know the industry wants to have improved services on the weekends, and we support that. But what we're not prepared to do is work hours for free to accommodate that. If we're going to work longer hours, we expect to be paid for those hours.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Mick, can I just come back to you? What was ASLEF's policy on trainee drivers during the pandemic?
On trainee drivers, there are an awful lot of functions that require 2 people in a cab. Yep. So what we put forward was quite creative in partnership. We created bubbles within the industry. So for those that needed to go out do signal sighting, or those who needed to go in front of a train, and we extended that process then, that if you had an instructor and a trainee, they would go into a bubble, they'd be tested. Once they're both clear, they'd be tested every week, and they would work together for that period of time to make sure the trainees could be trained.
So for the whole period, ASLEF's position was that providing the instructor and the trainee were bubbled together, they could continue throughout that period.
And then for the classroom-based training, we put social distancing, cleansing, and lower numbers in the classrooms. And we tried to do everything we could to protect those roles and those jobs and to ensure that the throughput happened.
So for any train operators that may or may not tell me that trainees had to stay at home because the union said they would not allow a trainee with an instructor driver in the cab, is that incorrect of them to say that?
The opportunity for them to put processes in place along the guidelines and agreements that were agreed at the RICF during the pandemic, the Joint Trade Union...
It's incorrect for them to say.
It's incorrect because there was a process if they chose to follow it.
So what you're saying is that if the TOCs wanted to have trainee drivers during the pandemic, they would have had to come to you to ask you to endorse it for that to happen, is that correct?
No, that wasn't what happened. What happened was, at the height of the pandemic, you can't wear masks in a driving cab. That might assist this, because most drivers wear spectacles and they fog up and whatever. And because of that, and because of the cleaning regimes, the driver instructors, all the trainees, could do it on a voluntary basis initially. We couldn't force or coerce people to do it. So the original system was, we put a system in place where it could happen.
Okay, but on a local basis, your representatives could have interpreted that?
Not really. I think most of the things that came out of the industry body at that time worked as a standard practice across all the TOCs.
Do you know what percentage of trainee drivers actually did train during the pandemic and those who sat at home?
I don't know, because you also factor in that an awful lot of train drivers would have been driving trains normally because of the amount of people impacted by the pandemic or safeguarding or else. So not all instructors were available, and not all the ability to do as you would normally do it, and the numbers you would normally do would not have existed.
Yeah. So I just wanted to, I don't know if Gavin's here, so I'm not going to steal any of your thunder, Gavin, but I wanted to ask you about the situation in Scotland. You have agreed with ScotRail, basically, as I understand it, a 5% pay deal over what period?
I believe it's a 1-year deal.
1-year deal.
I will confirm that for you.
And were there any pay rises, any efficiencies or productivities associated with that?
Nothing substantial to my knowledge, but I can get you a copy of the deal and send it to you. Can I make a point about ScotRail, though, that ScotRail was different to the other TOCs because they had pay rises in the intervening 2 years.
So thank you. So, is the unofficial overtime ban in Scotland off now for drivers?
I wouldn't know.
Sure. So, in terms
Didn't know there was an unofficial overtime ban. Thank you for praising me.
well, that's like what I think most people will understand. I just wanted to check with you on that one.
I do believe that people do vote with their feet and when they're unhappy.
Yeah.
But let me reassure you, we were not behind it.
Yeah. Thank you. So you'll be entering into further conversations with ScotRail about next year.
Yep.
And when will that be?
It normally happens traditionally in the industry about 2 months after the anniversary date. So every year in most TOCs we tend to be around this time of the year. So the reason most of our ballots have been this week is that we wait for the anniversary dates with all the TOCs to see if we made a substantial offer. We advised them that we required a substantial offer. When it wasn't forthcoming, then we made the decision to ballot.
You told us earlier that 8 train operators had balloted for strike action and action including short of a strike?
Yep.
Yeah. On what basis did those ballots get returned like that?
It was on the basis that we hadn't had a pay rise. Do you want a pay rise, and are you willing to take action, strike action?
It's all about pay.
On pay. It's all about pay.
And terms and conditions didn't feature as part of that.
There's been no offer on terms and conditions, so basically we haven't had a pay rise for 3 years. Even if we get a deal, it won't be a pay rise because we'll still be behind the curve because of the cost of living crisis.
So are you saying, therefore, have train operators said they're not going to enter into pay?
What train operators have said, they're unable to negotiate with us because the government said they can't offer more than 2%. And unless we give up a raft of productivity for less than it's worth.
So you've had no negotiations so far with respective employers?
We've exhausted.
Okay.
We've exhausted the negotiation with the employers because the employers have said they can't give us above 2% unless we give rafts of productivity that they're undervaluing.
Yeah.
And we said we wouldn't do that until we had a reasonable pay rise.
Could you just tell us what is the average salary for a train driver in your?
Well, I keep reading it's £59,000 to £60,000.
Well, I'm asking you for the fact.
I believe it's £59,000 to £60,000.
So 59.
Yep.
Okay, 59,000. And I think the chairman asked you about the hours and the days of the week. The majority, I think you said, is that right? We're on 35 hours a week?
The majority are on a 35-hour 4-day week.
Yeah.
Average 4-day week.
And roughly half with Sundays in? I'm sorry,
Yep.
Right. So what sort of negotiations do you think, where will your starting point be in this in order to achieve further pay rise?
Our starting point.
I'll just rephrase it. What is on the table for you to...
I've got 14 negotiating teams in there that know their companies and know their districts better than I do.
Yeah.
They come and make recommendations to us based upon the negotiations that take place. So, as I answered the question earlier, we could end up with different solutions in different companies. And that is down to the massive vagaries of privatisation. We have many companies where with many people in the same grade on different terms and conditions. And you might be varying it for one set of them or two sets of them, and that might impact upon how the negotiations go and what is received. So the complexity of it is not just simple as saying, what do all train drivers want across the board?
I see. If you go on strike, if you instruct your members to go on strike as a result of this ballot, will you pay your members strike pay?
No.
Nothing at all. Eddie, can I ask you the same question? If your members go on strike, do you pay strike pay to members?
We do in some cases, but in the context of this national dispute, no. So we've been known to where we've got cleaners out on strike, trying to get offered a minimum wage. Yeah. We'll pay them strike pay because they're very, very low paid. And they're relatively small in numbers. So in the national dispute, no. But the government is paying the industry side to make sure that their profits aren't damaged by any strike action that occurs.
Yeah, I appreciate you've got a number of grades that you're dealing with. It's not as straightforward as just the train drivers. In terms of the working week and the days per week and Sundays in and out, would I be right to say it's too straightforward just to say it's average this and average that? Is there a grade group? Is there a particular average?
In the train operators, we're generally 35-hour weeks, or there's some examples where that's higher. In the train operating companies, again, we've got quite a wide range of conditions around Sunday working. So I think we've probably got more people with Sundays in the working week than you'd find in the driver's grade, for example. But we also have a lot of people that work obligated or committed Sundays. So when I was on the railway, I had 17 Sundays I was obligated to work through the course of the year. They were outside of my working week and paid an overtime rate for doing them. But it was my obligated duty to work those turns. So there's a lot of people on arrangements that are like that. In-network rail is similar. We've got a range of hours between 35 probably up to 40. And there's different arrangements for Sundays as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just finish, if that's all right. Mick, I just wanted to come back to you earlier. I think you mentioned working 13 out of 14 days, 12-hour days and so on.
I've got from Graham's question.
Just so we're clear, that is optional.
It's optional.
Not, yeah. So, and will that attract a further rate of overtime? So, if you're paid, you know, like regular time, overtime, is that paid at time and a half or time?
Yes, it's generally paid at varying rates. It's different agreements in different companies.
What they've actually said.
Okay.
All right, okay.
Thank you. I think that's it for me for the moment. I mean,
Thank you, Chris. Gavin.